she wrote. And let me get this back. All right, Kenzie, take it away.
Okay, so my case study is When a Woman Should Be a Man. It starts with Karen White stared out the window of her office, but she was only half aware of what was the winter wonderland that was going outside because she was deeply troubled about the future of her missions organization. It was her organization that she had begun and for several years had been the director of. The purpose of the organization was to provide medical personnel for missions hospitals and clinics. Karen's organization recruits temporary workers and puts them in touch with missions that need them. At their last meeting, one of them, Dr. Brown, threw a bombshell into their discussion, and he raised the issue of having men under the authority of women, citing a radio preacher that he had heard that day. He asked whether or not the mission was well established that they could consider recruiting a man to be in charge. Karen, he said, could certainly remain as the assistant director and would be a valuable training tool to this new male director. The rational purpose was giving the change of the administration had caused turmoil in Karen's mind and had been on her mind all week. Her background and training and presented to the committee were to fulfill the authority of the Bible, and it never occurred to her that she was doing anything wrong. When she answered God's call to missions and administered the agency, she was sure that God called her into being in this role. At the discussion in the meeting, it left her thoroughly confused. She was a single woman. Did the instructions to the New Testament wives mean all women were subjected to all men, or were they universal for every place? Another person in their committee, Dr. Fleming, had voiced a concern about changing to a male administrator. With things going so well, he asked why risk the change that inevitably part of that may cause a slippage that might hurt their mission. He admitted that he did not quite know what to think about this biblical issue and the church's interpretation of it, but he also knew the real situation was very much a real one. Many young people commit themselves to this mission and had little guidance of how they should be getting involved. Also voiced by Dr. Fleming was the story of women in leadership and how this lady had experienced some difficulty in leadership. This difficulty experience was made him more sympathetic to women in leadership. Dr. Fleming said to Karen and the other committee members, and some lessons are valuable than others in this story that he had told. We should be careful at not repeating past mistakes. The mention of women leadership had made Dr. Brown bristle. I had to look up that word, which means irritated or angered. Karen herself flinched and tried to avoid those discussions. She wanted to get on with their work of the mission of evangelism, avoid this hassle of who should be in charge. As she thought about this decision she was still to make, should she resign and be submissive to the ways like the other evangelical women and that had been conditioned, or should she follow the new urge that she had to be convinced that God had called her to this mission and continue the work that God had begun with her? As she walked away from her house, trailing on the footsteps, Karen realized that her decision and the story that Dr. Fleming had said had told the other committee members would show that there would be a struggling to live out their call and mission in ministry in spite of the misunderstandings and traditions in some sectors of contemporary evangelism in the church. And at the end, she had said that I would trust in God and not be afraid. And the idea of the characters that I looked at would be Karen, Dr. Fleming, and then the story of Julie. With questions that I kind of looked at was, is it right for her to be in a leadership role? As Karen kind of looked at, is she was brought into this leadership position because she was called to mission. She saw a need and she met a need. And everything and with this mission, she had been blessed. And the other thing that I looked at is these were all volunteers. This mission that she had started was to have volunteers. And they have a committee board so that the leadership is not all just on her. She may have started this and she may be what they would count as leader, but there is more to this dynamic than just her being leader of it. Dr. Fleming is not really looking for this change because there might be a cause of turmoil and many things that may go wrong if they try to trass over the leadership because of just this one issue. For Dr. Brown, I was kind of a bit confused when it first, kind of how he first said it. It's like, has this been an issue with that he's thought before and now he's just voicing it? And is there a certain reason that it's making him angry because of this whole situation? If she steps away, what will happen to the medical mission that was put on her heart? I would say that God gave her the heart for missions and run it, but other things to run it as God had showed her to. She saw a need. She was called by God, and she filled that need, and He's blessing her ministry. And she is not unwilling to give up her leadership role to make this, I guess, easier for their mission. It is still complicated, but it is not the fact that Karen is unwilling to give up her role to make this run in what Dr. Brown is considering a more biblical fashion. The Bible teaches us to follow and respect authority. She is trying while also looking out for her mission to make sure that they continue it. As I looked at some of the verses for God as the man as the head, this is mentioned in the idea of the local church and in marriage. But as I was kind of trying to look into this, they're not run by a local church. They have constituency that is from churches, but this is still very much volunteer organized and started to just be more voluntary. So I'm not sure where that would fall under. Basically where it would the same things apply to this medical mission. Like I said before, if Dr. Brown's issue has been there for a while, why is he voicing it now? Because this mission has been running for a while, and it sounds like he's been on this board for a while. The issue was more brought up because of he had heard a podcast preacher of the day. I don't know how much I would really go off of that, just because there are many preachers out there that would preach online and everything else that may not always have biblical facts straight, and what could be looked at could be taken out of context and just by what you're hearing. If Dr. Brown's issue did not come out of nowhere, in fact, it seems to be a problem that seems to be of just him, because many of the other committee members did not take issue to this fact. Second, I don't think that if, like, he had mentioned that she could train somebody, but I feel like that would still be putting her in the same issue as she is now teaching this man to run her position. That's still the issue of her being over a man, even if she's training this man to be over her. It's still the same issue in my mind, but now she's giving him the tools that she already knows how to run to this new man, if that's how they choose to go. it did not seem like the churches that work with them had any issues either. I would say that if they had an issue with her running it, they would have made that claim a while ago. Sorry, my computer just did something weird. He claimed that this would be in line with more of their constituency, but these aspects are not on their mission, are not within the aspects of the local church or the bounds of marriage, which is where a lot of the verses were taken from. Like I said, and then like talking about if she were to step down, or even if they would, like later on, she would retire something, and putting another woman in that position, or even like it just made Dr. Brown have just some not so nice feelings. My view is that in this case, I would say that God has given her this mission role. I would agree with Dr. Fleming that in the sake of keeping this mission alive, because she has started, she knows how to run it. This was put on her heart, and she has been running it for a long time, to not change it, because that could hurt their mission. And they are reaching and helping many people at this time. That doesn't mean that it couldn't change for the future, that she can gradually maybe have someone put in a dual leadership role with her to, as kind of in the idea of like Aquila and Priscilla, how they do their ministry together, that she can have someone partner with her to help if that, if they are going to be continuing on that issue. Dr. Brown's issue did really kind of come out of nowhere from what I read. I don't know any other background context if this was brought up before, but from what I read, it seems like this hadn't come up before, and nor had anyone really thought about it. I really don't think that that was the place and time to bring up that issue. I think that should have been resolved in more private if he has that big of an issue with it. And this was not in the slightest to help anything that has anything to do with their medical mission or what they're doing. If you want to turn with me to look at Ephesians 5:6. Let no one deceive you with empty words, because these are the things of wrath. Wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. In that, I just looked at with kind of the more of the empty words that Dr. Brown was doing. If he has an issue with this, why wasn't it resolved privately instead of amongst their entire mission, when they're trying to make decisions for the entire mission and not just of her leadership role? Is have Colossians 3:18, which talks about that wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh to them. And you can also look at Colossians 4:1. Masters, treat your bondservants justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. She looks at this mission as not her personal mission, but a mission that God gave her. And in missions, if we feel God's calling, there needs to be an answer. And sometimes even things will change over time, but she looks at this as God is her leader over this mission. This is not just for her. It was God given to her, and that's how I view it as. And I have a couple other verses. And then I also have kind of some ladies to look at that were in leadership roles. We have Deborah, who was the only female judge in the Bible. She excelled in multiple areas. She served in ancient Israel as a prophet judge, military leader, songwriter, and many other things. We have Dorcas or Tabitha, who helped with the poor and needy. That was her mission, and that she ran a lot of those things. Those people depended on her. Phoebe was a first century leader of the early Christian community and made appearance in Romans 16, verse 1 and 2. Paul graciously introduces her as a fellow believer and really wants people to welcome her. And then as Priscilla, she helped her husband in ministry. These ladies in the Bible, along with and this one's not on there, but I also looked up some missionaries that are single women that also run and did a lot of their ministries. So we have Gladys. She was a missionary to China. A missions agency would not let her go, so she used all of her life savings to go on a mission because she felt called there. And she ended up doing a very, she was there for a while and had a very great ministry. There is a book called Small Woman, China Inland Mission. And then there's a book on her, and there's also a movie called In of the Sixth Happiness. Mary Slessor, she was with a missions board, and she helped in many areas too. And Amy Carmichael, who was had a missions agency behind her, but she saved many girls from Hindu temples. These ladies all took the call to missions, and I believe that's the exact same that Karen has also done here. Karen just wants to keep the work going. She's not making an issue of whether she has to step down or not. She's just looking out for her mission that God gave her to make sure that it continues, because this area still needs help. She doesn't want it to just, and they try to transfer it over and something happens, because then this mission is going to get hurt very, very badly. And I think that this caused a lot of issues within the committee, and now they're not sure how to go about this, and it's put their focus off of their actual mission, which is to put leaders and help their medical mission and send many people in these areas that need help. And now that they're having to think about this issue, they're not thinking about where they need to be trying to send people, where God is leading people, or even thinking about their mission at all right now, because now they're put completely off track. I believe that this issue, it is a great issue, but I also don't think that she needs to give up her role, because she answered the call to missions, as many of these ladies did. God is using her in this aspect, and I don't think taking her out is the best course of action.
All right. Good. Let's open this up. Who's first? Well, it's you and me against four ladies. Go ahead, Amy.
Kind of scared to talk.
Amy, you started to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I agree with you. Like, the Bible gives stipulations for women to submit to wives, to submit to their husbands, and for women to be submissive and to not teach in the church. I don't think the Bible says that every woman has to submit to every man in every circumstance of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I agree with you.
I agree with that as well. But if this does become right now, it sounds like Dr. Brown is the only one who has an issue with it.
Yeah.
And if it remains that it's just him, but then I don't think they should worry about it that much. But if the other committee members look into this further and they also come to the conclusion that she should step down, I don't think she should put up a big fight about it.
It doesn't seem like she would anyways.
Yeah.
Like, she just wants this mission to keep going.
Right.
Whether that means she is not in that leadership role, she still wants to be a part of it.
Yeah.
I would agree. If it's like the majority has an issue, then yeah.
But it looks like this just kind of came out of nowhere, and it hasn't been an issue before, and it doesn't look like anyone else is having the issue from what I could read in. I think that it is more of just his issue, but it seems like he may have been thinking this for a while, and now he's just had the courage to say it.
I don't think they can just brush him off.
Yeah.
I think they should like carefully consider the issues that he is bringing up.
And
But-
it seems like that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
What else? That's good. Let's keep it going.
Want to disagree with us, Will?
Well, I mean, like I've always been raised like in to know that women typically don't have a leadership role, but like you see it in like secular environment and such. Not usually like in a church role or something like. I've attended a church where not like regularly, but I've been to a church where a woman is the pastor, and I didn't return just because I didn't agree with it, but like I've never, I guess, been told why, I guess you could say. Like there's the passage in Timothy, I think it is, that when Paul talks to Timothy, that he says, I don't condone women to be in like a teaching position in the church or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm not sure if that's another instance where Paul was speaking out against something that was going on in the church in that, whichever city the church was in, like if there was an issue in that church that he was speaking on to Timothy about. Do you know anything?
You're referring to a passage that actually is not included. You didn't need to, but that's 1 Timothy 2.
Gotcha.
You got 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, which give us give us some instruction. But 1 Timothy 2 is the one you're thinking of, where he says, I do not permit a woman to teach nor usurp authority over man, but to remain in silence. And there's a lot of discussion about that. That is in a context of local church environment. Earlier in that same chapter, you talked about men leading in prayer, lifting up holy hands and leading. It's a church context there that he's talking about. In fact, the entire epistle of 1 Timothy is written with the express purpose of giving instructions regarding local church deportment. How do the people of God handle themselves in a local church context? And so we could spend a lot of time on that passage. Let me just make one statement. Can we turn there really quick since you brought it up, Will? And I'm just going to make, because I don't want to get too far off of the case study itself, but there is something about the text that I would like to say that I think would help us. And I don't know to what extent you have studied this passage in other classes. 1 Timothy 2. Notice he says, first of all, in verse 1, so he's dealing with a list of things that have to do with the way God's people conduct themselves in the church. And when he comes down to verse 8, I want the men in every place to pray. That doesn't mean women don't pray, but the men are leading in the worship. I think that's the idea in the public prayers. He's not talking about praying at home, praying somewhere else, right? You understand it? And then women, likewise, in verse 9, I want the women to adorn themselves with modesty and so on. And then in verse 11 is where it starts to get a little dicey here, when it comes to the women's role. A woman must quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness. I'm reading from the NASB, so it may sound a little different. But I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. So again, what's the context here?
Church.
It's the church. Okay. And what does he mean when he says, I do not allow a woman to teach?
Like teach a man.
How do you know he's talking about why not third graders or kindergartners? How do you know Paul is qualifying that? You're right, Amy, I agree with you. Read the next phrase.
Oh, over a man.
Okay, yeah, it seems like when he says to teach or exercise authority over a man, he's lumping them both together in the context of women holding authority over the men. Teaching, and you guys, I don't know if anybody's taking Greek, I can't remember any Greek scholar. Okay, it's a Greek infinitive, and there are some Greek scholars who would say that the infinitive actually is used in the sense of a position of teaching and not just the activity. In other words, you could translate it, at least the Greek would allow it to translate, I do not allow a woman to be teachers or exercise authority over the men. To be teachers over the men. So And then there's a debate as to what kind of teaching they're talking about. For instance, let's suppose that you have a day at church when you're talking about Alpha Women's Center, okay? And you invite a lady in who's the president of Alpha Women's Center, and she comes in and she teaches the church about the ministry of Alpha Women's Center. Is she violating Paul's command here? It's a woman who's coming in and she's teaching men. We've had women come in and talk about foster care. We had a couple of women in our church that's been really involved in studying and doing research on foster care. And she stood up and took about 10 minutes in a service and instructed us about foster care.
I think it's fine. It's just, I think it's not fine when they're like teaching what the Bible says and like instructing and saying like you should do this because the Bible says this.
Mhm.
Now, why would you say that? Why would you make that distinction? Why would you draw the line there?
I don't know.
Your position is very commonly held, so you're not out in left field. I'm just wanting to, yeah, go ahead,
Does
Liz.
it go to the next, or to the phrase, that the next phrase, the exercise authority, where when they're coming up and just an instructional, this is how Alpha Women's Center works.
Okay.
It's not an authoritative
Mhm.
aspect of the teaching, it's just an informative.
Okay. Okay, so the idea of teaching here, and it's connected with authority. So it sounds like he's using teaching here with the idea of instruction for, how do we say this? Authoritative instruction is probably the best way of putting it. Okay, it's a teaching that should result in, we're going to do it this way. This is how we act. This is how we live. Whereas, yeah, you're right. Somebody coming in from Alpha Women's Center is not teaching authoritatively, but giving orientation about, informing. And there is a difference there. And I do think it's a legitimate difference coming out of the text. But Rachel, you're right. A lot of people will say, what Paul is talking about here is that women should not be indoctrinating the church. The teaching of Bible doctrine, that is the responsibility of the man. That's a common position. I'm guessing that most of your churches probably hold that, except for the one you visited, Will. Okay. All right. I've been in churches, like that to visit. All right. I didn't mean to steal it, but you mentioned a pretty important passage, and I wanted to at least touch on that. So, continue.
As you kind of mentioned the Alpha Women's Center and kind of that's where I was more thinking, because like it is like the Alpha Women's Center is run by a woman, and many people go and volunteer and help and work out there. But it is to help people and to Alpha Women's Centers to help women. And this I kind of looked at this as it's a mission. It's a mission, and it's not a local church, but a medical missions group. And there are many there are many things that go into that. They hold, I guess they hold biblical aspects to things, but in overall they're going to run differently than our local church.
Mhm.
And I would say that if they were, I guess, more connected with a local church, that there would maybe have seen more of an issue, but they're not. They're running a medical missions group.
Mhm.
They are finding doctors and sending them to where they're needed,
Mhm.
because this volunteer board has the knowledge and the biblical wisdom to know what needs to be done here.
She's not pastoring. She's not teaching Bible class to the men. She's okay. Now let me throw a monkey wrench in this for you. Don't worry. 1 Timothy 2, the passage we just looked at. What's the reason Paul gives as to why a woman shouldn't teach a man? He's in the text there. What does he say?
Because Adam was made first.
So he traces it all the way back to the creation. Now, what do you do with somebody? I'll play the role of somebody here. I say, look, what Paul is saying here is that the woman in God's design was never intended to be a leader anywhere. Because this is not traced, he's not going back and saying this is the way it's to be in the church. He goes back to the very creation and says, this is the way it was in the created order. Therefore, woman is never intended to be a leader over the man. Liz, your hand went up quick. What is it?
I was just thinking about Proverbs 31, where the woman is very evidently an important leader among her household and then even in the town where she runs her own businesses and she manages these servants, and she is praised for that. So I don't think you can say that women was never intended to be a leader,
Okay.
just in certain contexts like the church and in marriage. She
Okay.
is not to be the leader.
All right.
And also, as I pointed out, there are many women that were put into leadership roles
Mhm.
by God. I listed a few of them. There are a lot more that I could have put on there, but these were the ones that I found
Okay.
I think reflected what the issue is here.
Good. Others want to comment on that? What does he say about Eve here? He goes on. He says, it was Adam who was first created, then Eve. And then he says, it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Now, if I'm going to play that same advocate role, I would say, you see, it's not just because it's in a church situation, but it's because the woman is weaker. Now, okay, just let me play my game here, all right? The woman fell and she was deceived. Men aren't as easily deceived as women. Paul says here that the woman was deceived, and therefore, because of the ease with which a woman is deceived, she shouldn't be allowed to have leadership authority because she can be tricked by her subordinates. I'm just reading the text and throwing out something for you to think, because this comes up in the conversation. And Paul does say that here. I'm not making those words up. And he concludes by saying her salvation, she's preserved by her role in the home. Essentially, that's what he's saying by bearing children. Now, there are some that would say that that's a reference to Mary, the ultimate woman, by bearing the seed of Christ, but that's really out there. So I'm just trying to get you to think about this. I mean, I'm assuming that a guy like Dr. Brown probably heard whatever he heard on the radio. I'm guessing this passage was probably involved there somewhere. And he probably heard the guy say something like I just said here, women weren't intended to be in authority because God didn't wire them that way. They're more easily, deceived. And therefore, the men who, are more, I'm just saying that's probably the type of thing that he heard on this, what was a radio program or something?
It was a podcast preacher.
Podcast?
Yeah.
It was on the radio.
This is because podcasts are a more recent thing. I thought those were older, but anyways, he heard.
Yeah, when it said it was like podcast radio-ish, like it kind of like
Yeah.
that. So I'm like
Okay.
assuming that they was something he had just heard.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to stir the pot a little bit. Here's what I'm doing. And believe me, you'll deal with this. See, one of the problems in this story is that apparently this mission agency had never really published anything about the role of men and women in leadership. And so they're having to deal with it here. But I'm thankful that most mission agencies, have dealt with this, or fields have dealt with this, so that this kind of confusion can be avoided at the beginning. Well, let me ask you this. In what way was Eve deceived? I mean, is Paul saying that the women are just stupid and they can't understand anything, and so we have to leave with the men? Or was there a special, what did the deception of Eve involve?
Is it like lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. It had to do with truth, areas of truth, right? And now, was Adam deceived? He says here, it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman. Did Adam join in the sin? So wasn't Adam deceived too?
Was it he willfully sinned?
That's the explanation that's normally given. She actually believed that this was the best thing, whereas the impression you get is that Adam knew what God had said. He's putting it together in his mind, but he's making a willful choice to disobey God. Whereas you get the impression that Eve actually, if I can say it this way, she went into it not so much with her eyes wide open, but actually convinced that the serpent was giving her. It wasn't so much the willful disobedience as it was on the part of Adam. Again, that's not specifically spelled out in the passage, so we have to do a little bit of thinking about it. I do not think that what he's saying here is that women can't make decisions, that women can't be trusted with authority. I do not believe that, okay? And Kenzie, like you said, even in the world in which Paul lived, there were women in leadership roles, and he never, the very first person he sends greetings to is Phoebe. And even though it doesn't say exactly what she did, she's called a helper. That word is used, but she's obviously esteemed in the church there. Okay. Well, go ahead. Let's talk about it more. Well, you got to have an opinion of some sort over there.
I mean, I like what we're saying, and like, so one thing that I was thinking of when we were talking about the First Timothy passage and bringing up the Alpha Women's Center thing, like, if you were saying that at a local church, like the president of Alpha Women's Center came and talked to a local church, it's not like authoritative instruction that she's giving. It's what did we say?
Informational.
Informational.
Mhm.
And so, in that sense, it's okay then, right?
Right.
So, in this role that Karen, right, is her name, that Karen has over the missions agency, is that viewed as authoritative then?
Yeah, it is. She's the president or whatever the title is of this clinic. She's definitely has the authority.
So, like, missions like agencies work through like the local church, right?
Mhm.
And when they send out their missionaries, like in partnering with the local church, so doesn't that go hand in hand together, like sort of?
Okay, you brought up a really, really good point that we haven't touched on yet. And that is, what is the relationship of this clinic with
Local church.
local church? There are some mission agencies that will not allow for medical or translation or aviation ministries that are totally disconnected with any church or church plant, and this is one of the reasons why. They believe that the church, now you say, well, what if she's connected with her church back in the States, the sending church? Okay, yeah, there's a geographic issue there, but functionally you could do that. But if there were a church plant going on here and the church authorized the founding of this clinic and put her in the leadership of the clinic from a medical standpoint, it would be a different discussion, right? Because now she would still be acting in a position of authority, but under the authority of the local church in a position that doesn't involve the indoctrination of God's people's doctrinal instructions. Does that make sense? So I think one of the things you can see here, and I'm glad you brought that up, Will, you can see the importance of the local church and its role, which doesn't even, I don't remember ever reading anything in here about a local church that's going to weigh in on this. It's the committee that has to make this decision.
They have local churches that like donate to them and all of
Right.
this, but this missions medical missions group runs basically off of this volunteer committee.
Yeah, exactly. Where's the local church's voice in this? And I hope this is a good lesson. Yeah, Will?
Just agreeance.
If there was a church started there, their missionary leading that church or a national pastor, they would and should have a say in this. But because they went there and started this without any local church involvement or authority, now you got a problem when it comes to something like this. Who's going to call the shots? Does Dr. Brown have more weight? Does it become an opinion question? There's no authority invested here through the local church. That's a problem. So, nursing, whatever it is, I would say it's a wise thing to say, I'm only going to go to a place where there is, and if there's not, at the very least, your sending church needs to be, and it's pretty hard for a sending church across the ocean to exercise authority over something you're doing, so far away. That's one of the issues that comes up. What else? We've got about 6 minutes here. These are good comments. Is everybody in agreement that God never intends for men to have leadership in every aspect of society? In other words, does anybody here believe that a woman should never lead any kind of an organization anywhere in or out of the church? I don't think we're there, okay? And I think that some of these passages you cited give evidence that women were leaders and Paul didn't try to,
Yeah.
So there's a local church context. And if this is a spiritual ministry, now if this ministry has nothing to do with the local church and it's purely medical ministry, but see, it's connected to a mission agency and that muddies the waters.
Well, they connect with some medical missions. From what I got is they are more of a group that helps bring the medical doctors to different missions groups. They find temporary doctors to fulfill roles until they can get a more permanent one for that role.
Right.
Whether that's, and these are all strictly voluntary.
Mm-hmm.
From what I got is this whole mission, like this whole medical missions group is to just help fill roles, medical missions fill roles that need to be filled, whether that's permanent or temporary. Their mission is just to help supply what's needed.
Right. And unfortunately, the bulk of the argument in this case study becomes practical. The whole section on Dr. Fleming and what he told about Julia was her name.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's a good illustration, but it's a pragmatic one. It's not a theological. You've got to start with Scripture and then work from there. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, ladies, I hope you didn't understand me to say that I believe that women are more gullible than men, and I'm not. I tend to be very gullible myself, and I know a lot of women who are much sharper than some men who are really gullible. So please don't. I didn't want to communicate that. I don't think you believe that either, do you? Well,
It's okay, we got you on camera.
yeah, I know that. And another thing to keep in mind when it comes to the church is that the church is a reflection of Christ, and the Christ loved the church, he gave himself for it. Husbands, love your wives. There seems to be a parallel between Christ and his church and men and their wives. So when it comes to leadership in the church, I think that it's much more natural. It's much more consistent for the men to be leading, the church ministry and the wives serving, because it does reflect that relationship between Christ and his church seen in the husband-wife relationship. Okay. I just think there's something to be said about that. So ladies, if you have a place where you can serve and you have a particular gift and you're good at something, you can lead a ministry, by all means. But if it's under the auspices of the church, then you are not ultimately an authority. It's the church. And that's a protection for you, frankly. It is. This lady is vulnerable. She's really doesn't have any protection because apparently this ministry wasn't started under the authority of a local church. And that creates problems.
Yeah.
Any other comments? It's good stuff. All right. Well, then I think we can call it good. Yeah, Rachel?
Are there any case studies on tattoos?
Not in here. Unless you can find one that maybe has something to do with rituals or something that has to do with the marking of the body. I don't know. There are some that have to do with rituals and things like that. You could check them out.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to take the time to develop, write your own story, I mean, it's gonna be extra work for you. You could do that, because I do want it to be a case study of some sort, but if you want to write your own and I could look at it, that's gonna take some time. I don't know if you want to do that. All right. Thank you, Liz Tuesday, on Fuel for the Pump. Good. Thank you.